With the disaster of NASCAR 21, many people and gamers all alike have been going back to the NASCAR Heat Series. After all, NASCAR 21 was possibly the worst video game in NASCAR history, definitely had the absolute worst opening for a video game NASCAR's ever had, was amazingly hyped and incredibly important for the future of console gaming, and the release alone had torpedoed it. But how bad or good was the NASCAR Heat franchise? Was it as bad as we remember it at the time? Was it better now that we have Ignition to kind of have a litmus test of? Or was it something else? Well, I want to look into all that today, so let's look into it.
Hey Kyle, is that NASCAR Heat Evolution?
NASCAR Heat Evolution was the first game that was produced in the new NASCAR Heat Series. With it, you had 7 years ago to the day of this video being published, the publishing of the game itself. Before NASCAR 21, though, this was seen as the worst NASCAR game of all time. It had a horrible start, and many other games that were around it in time, like the Technics ones, were fresh in the memories of fans and gamers. You had NASCAR Inside Line as well as NASCAR 15 that others could go back to, and of course, they would. This was supposed to be a fresh start for the NASCAR video game franchise, and unfortunately, it was about as fresh as a rotting fish on a sunny day. There was just absolute okay media reception, is the best way to put it, absolutely mediocre, but anyone who actually played the game knows just how terrible it was. The game was bare bones. It was also having horrible glitches. Glitches like entire fields completely disappearing on any kind of mode, as well as just pausing it and then going back into the race, causing you to go faster with smoke coming everywhere. There was bad physics, bad crash models, sounded terrible, drove horrible. There was really no way to justify saying that this game was anything more than horrid. The best part of it is that Carl Edwards was on the cover of it in his last season ever in NASCAR, so I guess it's fitting, but seemingly like a lot of things in Carl Edwards' career, it ended on a pretty bad note. This was also a game that was put out by Monster Games and Duesenberry Martin as well, and honestly, there was nowhere to go but up. Next up was NASCAR Heat 2. Brought out by Monster Games in 704, the ones who would bring out the two games after this one as well. And releasing on September 12th, 2017 with Kyle Busch on the cover, it seemed like right away that this was going to be a better game. It had the working title of NASCAR Dirt to Daytona, and many got excited that it was a complete rebranding again, or just a remastering of the classic game. But it wasn't. But what it did have was all three national series, as well as a career mode that you could start in trucks and move your way up. It wasn't a very good career mode, though, and many did not like much about the game. Yes, it was better than Heat Evolution, but it was like polishing a turd. It still was pretty bad. It still had many of the same issues. There were glitches, there were physics issues, there was sound issues, but there was a big improvement. There still was hope, and there was a clear direction that they were going in, but honestly, this is probably the most forgettable game of the series, as the ones after it were way better, the one before it was horrible, and, well, the current, or I guess last one, well, we'll talk about that one in a lot more detail in a bit. On September 7th, 2018, the Hendrick Quartet of Jimmy Johnson, Chase Elliott, William Byron, and Alex Bowman graced the cover of the new NASCAR Heat 3. This was a competent game. This wasn't a game that was going to crash all the time. It still had its issues, but it was playable. People who weren't even NASCAR fans could pick it up and, while not maybe having too much fun, couldn't say it was the worst gaming experience of their lives like they could probably do with the last two games. There was an added fictional dirt series that tried to emulate local dirt and short track racing that you could build your way up in the career mode. And this also is where NASCAR started to really go into esports, bringing out the NASCAR Heat Pro Series, as well as other different additions to the online mode that could help with esports for just independent leagues. And this was definitely not ready either. The online mode was a mess. There was a lot of netcode issues, glitches, and while physics had been improved a bit, they were nowhere near being ready for a competitive series that was going to be broadcast to hundreds, possibly thousands of people, whether it was by NASCAR or by YouTubers or by just anyone in general. The physics, though, were the biggest point of contention for fans. We all knew that something was finally starting to get a little bit better, though I will say, me jumping in at that point instead of playing the first two before this, it definitely was a big shock, especially when I would go on Atlanta and immediately realize just how bad it played compared to the EA games and the Technics games. I wasn't much of a gamer before this, but again, physics were the biggest part for me too. There was a massive need to fix this, as well as, like I said, the netcode online, which was atrocious for basically anyone who used online mode. On September 13th, 2019, 4 years before I published this video, Kevin Harvick would grace the cover of NASCAR Heat 4. This game was decent, in my opinion. Maybe not great, not even good, but it was a massive step up from NASCAR Heat 3, and at this point, I wouldn't blame people for buying in and saying, you know what, maybe we just need to wait it out. They're getting better and better. There were custom cars, in-depth setups, track maps, some that were basic things for racing games, but getting to this point now with as bare bones as the last 3 games had been was a huge improvement. Also, the physics and online mode were improved immensely as well, as was the career mode. None of these were perfect. They were not going to really hold a candle up, in my opinion, to prime EA NASCAR games, but they still had room to improve, and it seemed like they were finally listening to the people, and people seemed to be positive because of it. I think that this one's probably more remembered because of its shorter lifespan. I thought personally the online was great, and the super speedway racing, when you could get going really well, was fun, but this one probably had the shortest lifespan for players of any of the NASCAR Heat games, compared especially to the next one, NASCAR Heat 5. And because of this, I don't think as many of the glaring issues were shown, and people remember it better. Only 10 months later, in July of 2020, NASCAR Heat 5 would come out. The first game that would ever be put out with help from Motorsport Games. This one, in my opinion, is a complete copy and paste to the average viewer, as well as anyone who had played the first game through the fourth game. This is a copy and paste of NASCAR Heat 4. It was a bad release as well, and it gave the vibe that it was completely rushed, as there were graphic problems, there were car problems, everything you can talk about. And while it was quickly fixed, it soured many gamers at this point. At this point, we had seen a gradual improvement, and now it had completely plateaued off. And we were told, and many people would say those dumb words, to just pay this one so that you can fund the next good game. At this point, we're 5 years in. There's 5 games, and while there was immense improvement, it was nowhere near to the level that it should be at. And this is where you started to see people really get mad about the state of console gaming on a wider level, rather than just a couple people who were highly critical of it like I was. There were small changes, but because of being so much like Heat 4 outside of a testing mode, many people just stuck with Heat 4 for a while. Now, it has lasted longer than NASCAR Heat 4 in its lifespan, but that was mostly because of how horrible Ignition was. It has had countless updates and DLCs, but Motorsport Games, being the company it has been late on almost all of those, and from what it looks like, has terribly ruined the game itself. Now, it's just better to get mods from fans rather than the company itself, but overall, it really wasn't all that horrible. So after saying all that, what's the legacy of this game franchise? Was it that bad? I mean, Ignition gave, I think, a lot of rose-colored glasses, but was it really that bad? Honestly, the first 2 were horrible. The third one, I thought it had good improvement. The 4th and 5th, I would actually go back and play. It was not as good as its predecessors. I wouldn't even say it was a good series, but it was serviceable at best towards the end, and honestly, I think any of us fans would go back to the Heat games rather than Ignition after what we all saw. But with that, I want to pass it on to you and ask what you thought of the NASCAR Heat Series. Did you love it? Did you loathe it? Is it grown on you, or have you just hated it more since Ignition came out? Let me know down in the comments below. While you're at it, leave a like on this video, share this video, and subscribe to this channel for more great NASCAR content. Thank you so much to all my channel members for your continued support, and be sure to watch the NASCAR Weekly Podcast tonight on Danny B Talks channel. So, until next time, have a good one.